Seneca to Paulinus, on the transience of life. Chapter 1. Most mortals complain, Paulinus, of the perfidy of nature. It is said that we are born so briefly, and that the time allotted to us flies by so quickly that with the exception of but a few, we pass away before we have had time to prepare for it properly. It is not only the ignorant multitude that cries out for this universal calamity, as it is generally believed. Not only the rabble, but many a glorious man has not restrained his sorrowful complaints in the face of such a calamity. Here is the greatest of physicians exclaiming, "Life is short, art is long." Here is Aristotle making a claim against nature that is little befitting a sage. To other animals, by her mercy, she has so lengthened the age that they live through 5 or even 10 generations. But to man, born for great deeds, she has put an end much sooner. No, it is not little time we have, but much we lose. Life has been given to us long enough, and it will be enough to accomplish the greatest deeds if it is distributed wisely. But if it is not guided by a good purpose, if our wastefulness and carelessness let it slip through our fingers, then when our last hour comes, we are surprised to find that the life we did not notice is over. Exactly so. We did not get a short life, but made it short. We have not been deprived of it, but shamelessly squandered it. Just as a rich royal patrimony, when passed into the hands of a bad master, is scattered to the wind in a flash, and the property, however modest, given to a good guardian, is multiplied. So the time of our life is lengthened for the one who cleverly disposes of it. Why do we complain about the nature of things? It is favorable to us, and life is long if you know what to use it for. But what do we do? One is mired in insatiable greed, another in the vanity of endless toil and fruitless activity. One is sucked up like a sponge by wine, another slumbers in unbroken laziness. One is tormented by vanity eternally dependent on the opinions of others. Another's passion for trade drives him headlong across all seas and lands for profit. Others are consumed by warlike fervor. They never for a moment cease to think of the dangers somewhere threatening someone and worry for their own safety. There are people who are full of selfless devotion to their superiors and give themselves into voluntary slavery. Many are seized by envy of other people's wealth, many the care of their own. Most people do not pursue a particular goal. They are tossed from side to side, shaky, fickle, self-despairing frivolity. They rush from one thing to another, and some and nothing at all attracts them. They see no guiding purpose in anything, and the fate catches up with them in the relaxation of sleepy yawning. The greatest of poets, whose saying we could take as an oracle, is truly right. The part of life in which we live is insignificant, for the rest is not life, but pastime. Vices encircle and crowd people from all sides, not allowing them to straighten up, not allowing them to raise their eyes and see the truth, dragging them down to the bottom, and there firmly binding them to passions. Man is unable to free himself and come to himself. Even if there is a sudden respite in life, the excitement does not cease in man as in the sea after a storm. The waves still rush long after the storm, and he never knows rest from his passions. Do you think I am speaking of universally recognized losers? Look at others whose happiness makes everyone's head spin. They are suffocating under the weight of what they call goods. How many are oppressed by wealth? How much blood is spoiled by eloquence and the daily duty of shining wit? How many lose their health in endless pleasures? How many are kept from catching their breath by the inexhaustible flow of customers? Go through them all, from the bottom to the top. This one seeks a lawyer, this one runs to intercede, this one is accused, this one defends, this one judges. No one cares about himself. Everyone is absorbed in other things. Ask about those whose names are on everyone's lips. What is so remarkable about them? And this, one is the guardian of some, another of others, but no one cares about himself. Some people are indignant, complaining that, say, The high-ranking persons despise us. They do not find time to receive us when we wish to see them. Pure madness. How dare you complain about the arrogance of others when you never find time for yourself? He will still notice you as you are, even though with a vexation on his face. He will still listen to you and let you go home to his house. But you will never notice yourself. Never listen to yourself. You say that you wanted to be with someone else, but you can never be with yourself for a minute. Chapter 3. Every bright mind, every head that has once in its life been illumined by a thought, will not tire of marveling at this strange obscuration of the minds of men. Indeed, none of us will allow our own possessions to be invaded, and, if the slightest dispute about boundaries should arise, will take up stones and arms. But in our own lives we allow others to interfere without hindrance, and, moreover, we ourselves invite the future masters and managers of our lives. There is no man willing to share his money with others, and how many to whom each gives away his life. We are vigilant in guarding our Father's inheritance, but when it comes to spending time, we are excessively wasteful, and this is the only thing in which stinginess is worthy of respect. I would like to stop an old man in the crowd and ask, "You have reached the last age available to a man. You are probably 100 years old or even more. Try to remember your life and make a calculation. Estimate how much of this time was taken away by the creditor, how much by the girlfriend, how much by the patron, how much by the client, how much was spent on quarrels with your wife, on punishing the servants, on running around on business. Add to this the illnesses that you yourself are guilty of. Add the time you have just spent so uselessly, and you will see that you are now much more years than you have really lived. Remember when you have carried out your own decisions. Count the days that have passed in the way you have planned. Remember the days when you were at your ease, when your face kept its natural expression, when there was no anxiety in your soul. Estimate how much real work you have managed to do in such a long century, and you will see that most of your life has been plundered to pieces by strangers, and you did not realize what you were losing. Remember how much of your life has been taken from you by empty griefs, foolish joys, greedy aspirations, false and amiable chatter, and how little of it is left to you. Count it, and you will realize that you are dying prematurely in your 100 years. What's the matter? It is that you live like eternal winners, forgetting about your own perishability, not noting how much of your time has already expired. You throw it left and right, as if you have an inexhaustible supply of it, and yet perhaps the very day that you so generously give to a person or a cause is the last. You fear everything in the world like mortals, and crave everything in the world like immortals. Take heed, and from almost everyone you will hear such words. At 50, I will retire, and from 60, I will be free from all duties in general. And who, I wonder, guarantees you that you will live to these years? Who commands events to go exactly as you suppose? And besides, how are you not ashamed to spare for yourself only the miserable remnants of your own years, to leave for a good and reasonable life only that time which is no longer good for anything else? Is it not too late to begin to live when it is time to end? What a foolish forgetfulness of one's own mortality, to put off sensible reflection until one is 50 or 60, and intend to begin life at an age to which few live to. Chapter 4. Take a closer look. Men who have been raised to the summits of power and authority involuntarily sigh sometimes for the coveted leisure, and praise it in such a way that one would think they would prefer it to all they have. Often they long to sink from these heights, if only they could be sure of surviving it. For excessive happiness collapses under its own weight, even without external shock or attack. The divine Augustus, who received from the gods more than anyone else, did not stop praying for the dispensation of peace and rest from state cares. Every conversation he usually reduced to how good it would be to be free at last from business. In the midst of his labors, he consoled himself with the false but sweet thought of how one day he would reclaim himself for himself. In one letter sent to the Senate, he promises that the days of his future vacation will not be completely devoid of dignity, and perhaps bring him glory not much less than the former. There, I read these words. Of course, about such things should not be said in advance. To make a proper impression, it is necessary to show what has already been done. However, I am so eager to reach this desirable period, the best time of my life, that since this joy does not hurry to me in reality, I am getting ahead of myself and taste part of the future pleasure in sweet talk about it. This is it. Leisure appears to him a thing so marvelous that, without being able to enjoy it in fact, he found pleasure already in the mere thought of it. The man who saw that everything in the world depended on him alone, who decided the fate of men and nations, thought that the happiest day of his life would be the day when he would throw off the power that clothed him. He knew how much sweat had been wrung out of him by this happiness that shone upon the world, how many secret anxieties were hidden behind its rays. First with his fellow citizens, then with his colleagues in office, finally with his relatives, he had to settle the question, who is who? By arms, flooding the seas and lands with Roman blood. Having gone through Macedonia, Sicily, Egypt, Syria, Asia by war, having circled almost the entire Mediterranean Sea, he finally turned his troops, tired of internecine slaughter, against external enemies. And while he was pacifying the Alps and taming the enemy who had invaded the heart of the empire in the midst of a truce, while he was pushing back the borders beyond the Rhine, Euphrates and Danube, in the city itself, the daggers of Murena, Scipio, Lepidus, Ignatius, and others were sharpening on him. No sooner had he escaped this misfortune than a new one struck him, already broken by years, with a shudder. This time his own daughter, and a whole swarm of noble young men, whom adultery had bound more tightly than any oath. And here a new fear, repeating that which had already been once before. Again, a woman in league with Antony. These pustules he cut off with his members, but immediately new ones swelled up. As if in a too full-blooded body, there was a constant hemorrhage somewhere. And now he dreamed of rest and leisure. The thought of it made cares and sorrows recede. This was the chief desire of a man who had the power to fulfill wishes. Chapter 5. Marcus Cicero, who had to be torn between Catilinus and Clodius on the one hand, Pompey and Crassus on the other, between outspoken enemies and doubtful friends, who was tossed and beaten in the waves of the whirlpool together with the sinking state, while he kept trying to save it, and in the end, sank with it, who had never known peace and happiness, nor patiently endured misfortune. How many times he cursed his hated consulship, though he himself praised it, if not without reason, at any rate without measure. In one letter to Atticus, sent when Pompey father was already defeated, but the sun was again gathering in Spain's scattered army, he simply weeps. You ask what I am doing? Hanging about in my Tusculan, half free, half slave. And then he begins to lament all his past life, to complain about his present one, looking with despair into a hopeless future. Cicero called himself half free. But by Hercules, a wise man would never demean himself to be called by such a name. A wise man cannot be half free. His freedom is firm and always remains inviolable. He is bound by nothing, is his own master, and is subject to no one. For who can rise above him who has risen above fate itself? Chapter 6. Livius Drusus, a very resolute man of a violent and hot temper, ventured to introduce new laws, unheard of before, and thereby brought upon the country great misfortune in the person of the two Gracchus. Surrounded by crowds of adherents from all over Italy, he did not foresee the outcome of his case, until he found himself in a position where he could not continue it, and to abandon once started is no longer in his power. Then he is said to have cursed his life. From a young age has not known a moment of peace, and expressed himself in this way. Say, he alone among the Romans, even as a small boy, did not know neither days off nor holidays. When he was still a very small child, dressed in a praetexta, he dared to speak before the court in defense of the accused and to test the power of his influence in the forum, and, it is said, so effectively that some verdicts were determined by his speeches. What else could such an early ambition, not according to his age, have resulted in? Even then, it could be said with certainty that this child's unchildish impudence and self-confidence would lead to great misfortunes, both private and public. So late did he begin to complain that as a child he knew neither leisure nor recreation, preoccupied only with the serious affairs of the forum. Some suppose him to have taken his own life, for he died suddenly from a single wound inflicted in the lower abdomen. Not all agree in recognizing his death as voluntary, but none refuse to recognize it as timely. Why multiply the examples of men who seemed to everyone to be the pamperers of happiness, whose words truthfully testify to their own disgust at all they had done in their lives? Their complaints did not change either those who heard them or those who uttered them. No sooner had the involuntary confessions echoed than the passions took their accustomed place again. If your life were 1,000 years long, it would still be insignificant, I swear by Hercules. Such vices can devour any number of centuries without a trace. Nature has made the time allotted to us fleeting, but the mind lengthens it. But with you, it cannot but pass in a moment. You do not try to preserve it, to hold it, to slow down the rapid running of time. You let it pass, as if you had plenty of it and could easily recover what you have lost. How many great men, forsaking all that hindered them, renouncing wealth, duties, pleasures, gave themselves up to the age of old age, to the one occupation of learning to live. Yet most of them passed away recognizing that they had not learned how to live. What to speak of the others? Believe me, a truly great man who has risen above human delusions will not allow a minute of his time to be taken away. His life is the longest because he was free for himself for the whole of the time he had allotted. Like the most thrifty master, he has not left a scrap of time lying idle and uncultivated. He has not put the smallest share at another's disposal, nor has he found a thing so wonderful that it is worth acquiring in exchange for his own time. Therefore his time was enough for him. But it can in no way be enough for those whose lives are being shredded to pieces by strangers. Do not think, however, that they themselves do not sooner or later begin to realize what they have lost. Listen to the fortunate, burdened with success, and you will hear how often, surrounded by crowds of clients, in the midst of litigation or some other honorably tedious bustle, they exclaim, "I am not allowed to live." Of course they don't. Anyone who calls you a lawyer is taking your life away from you. How many days did that defendant steal from you? How many that candidate for elected office? How many that old woman tired of burying her heirs? How many that imaginary sick man who wanted to tease the greed of all those who wanted his money? How much was taken away by your overly high-ranking friend, who considers you not so much friends as household objects? Check your expenses, I say to you, and sum up the days of your life. You will see that you have only a few left, and that only those that are of no use to others. One who longed passionately for a facet 16 and finally attained the position, dreams now of folding it and repeats without end, "When will this year end?" Another dreamed of organizing games and waited a long time for the lucky lot to fall to him, and now sighs, "When will I finally get rid of them?" The third is a famous lawyer who is always in great demand at the forum, in the midst of a huge crowd of people, so that the hindquarters cannot even hear him. He wins every case he takes on and thinks, "When will the court vacations finally be over?" Everyone rushes through life at breakneck speed, hungry for the future, languishing in disgust at the present. On the contrary, he who uses every moment of his time for his own benefit, who arranges the schedule of each day as if it were his whole life, he waits for tomorrow without hope and without fear. Indeed, What unexplored pleasures can bring him the coming hour? Everything is known, he has tasted it all, and now he is satisfied. Let chance and fortune, if they please, decide the rest. His life is already out of danger. Something more can be added to it, but nothing can be taken away. So to a well-fed man you can offer another morsel, and he will take it, but without greed. So let gray hair and wrinkles do not make you think that a man has lived a long time. Rather, he did not live a long time, but a long time on earth. After all, when you meet a man who has been caught by a storm while sailing from the harbor, and the raging winds have been driving him around for a long time without taking him out of his native bay, you would not consider him an experienced sailor, would you? True. He had been at sea for a long time, but not sailing, but dangling in the waves as a plaything of the winds. Chapter 8. I never cease to be amazed to see people asking for time, and others agreeing to do so without the slightest difficulty. Yet both pay attention only to the object for which they ask for time, and neither notices the time itself. It is as if the one asked for nothing, and the other gave nothing. The most precious thing in the world is not taken seriously. They are deceived by the fact that it is incorporeal. It cannot be seen or touched, and that is why it is valued cheapest of all. Or rather, it is not valued at all. People accept annual or lump sum wages very willingly, paying for them with their labor, effort, or diligence. Time is not valued. It is used so carelessly as if it were free. But look at the same people when they fall ill, when they are threatened with death and embrace the knees of doctors. Look at those condemned to execution. They are ready to give everything they have to live. What inconsistency of feeling! If each of us could count the years ahead of us with the same accuracy with which we count the years we have lived, then with what reverent frugality would those of us who have little time left treat time? And in fact, even a small remnant, if it is accurately known, is easy to dispose of. Special thrift is required for something that may end at any moment. Do not, however, think that people never think that time is an expensive thing. The one who is loved especially strongly usually say that they are ready to give, for his sake, some years of their lives. And indeed they do, but they don't realize it themselves. They give in such a way that those for whom it is done get nothing. They give without ever bothering to find out what it is and what they are depriving themselves of. They throw away their time on anything without regret, for they do not see their losses. No one will make up for your lost years. No one will give you back. The time of your life, once started, will go forward without stopping or turning back. It moves silently, without any indication of its speed. It glides silently by. Neither a royal decree nor a people's resolution will stop it. As it started on its way from the first moment of your life, it will run forward without stopping. What is the result? You are busy with your own affairs, and life is running away. Death is about to appear, and you will have to find free time for it, whether you want it or not. Chapter 9. Is there anyone in the world more foolish than people who boast of their wise foresight? They are perpetually busy and preoccupied beyond measure. Howbeit, at the expense of their lives, they arrange their lives to be better. They make far-reaching plans, and to put things off is the worst way to squander life. Every coming day is taken from you. You give up the present in exchange for the promise of the future. Waiting is the main hindrance of life. It is eternally dependent on tomorrow and ruins today. You try to dispose of what is still in fortune's hands, letting go of what was in your own. Where are you looking? Where are you stretching your hands? The future is unknown. Live now. Here is the saving prophecy uttered by the greatest of poets, as if by the suggestion of divine lips. In the life of unhappy mortals, the fastest day flies by, the best day. What are you standing there for? He says to you, why do you hesitate? Grab them, or they'll run away. But they will run away even if you grab them. which is why the transience of time must be fought with the rapidity of its use, hurrying to get as much out of it as possible, like a spring stream that rushes in and runs out just as quickly. And what a splendid expression, censuring our eternal slowness. He speaks not of the best season of life, but of the best day of it. And you, disregarding the irreversible run of time, carelessly and unhurriedly build up before you a long series of months and years, as if their number depends only on your greed. Listen, they tell you that a day is a day you can't keep. How can one doubt that the first best day runs away from the unhappy, that is, the eternally busy mortal? Old age suddenly comes upon their still childish souls with all its weight, and they are not prepared for it. They are helpless and unarmed. They have not foreseen anything in advance and are surprised to find that they have suddenly grown old. After all, they did not notice the daily approach to the end. Thus, conversation, reading, or strenuous reflection deceive the traveler, and he finds himself in a place without having noticed how he arrived. The same thing happens in our constant and rapid journey through life, which we make in reality and in dreams at the same speed. Busy people notice it only when they stop at the goal. Chapter X. I could, if I wished, justify my position by all the rules, dividing it into parts and proving each one. I can think of many arguments to prove that the shortest lives are those of busy people. But as Fabian used to say, to fight the passions one must exert one's strength rather than find subtle arguments, and he was a true philosopher of the old school, not of the present pulpit talkers. He said that only a frontal attack can crush the structure of our passions, and not light wounds from verbal arrows launched from afar. He did not approve of the intricacies of words. Passions must be exterminated, not tickled. But for men to see and condemn their own delusions, they must still be taught and not merely lamented. Life is divided into 3 times: past, present, and future. Of these, the time in which we live is brief. That which we are to live is indefinite. That which is to be lived is sure and certain. For fortune has already forfeited its rights to it, and no one's arbitrary will can change it. Busy people are deprived of this time. They have no time to look back on the past, and even if they did, they would not do so. It is unpleasant to remember what they have to repent of. So, they do not want to mentally return to the badly lived years. They do not dare to look at their former vices, because at one time they brightened up, like a cunning procurer, and as if to justify the proximity of the desired pleasure, and at a distance they are seen as it is, without embellishments. No man would condemn himself voluntarily to the torments of reminiscence, except he who has subjected all his actions to his own censorship, which is never wrong. He who has acted with ambitious ambition, arrogant contempt, unbridled lust for power, guile and deceit, avaricious avarice, or passion for waste, cannot but fear his own memory. But the past is a sacred and inviolable part of our life, beyond the vicissitudes of human existence, wrested from the realm of fortune. It can no longer be disturbed by need, fear, or sudden attacks of illness. It can neither be disturbed nor taken away. It is our only lifelong possession to be feared. In the present, we always have only one day, and not even a day, but its individual moments. But the days that have passed are all yours. They will appear at the first command, and will stand patiently still, lasting as long as it pleases you to consider them. Busy people, however, have no time to do this. A calm and carefree soul is free to go to any period of its life and walk wherever it pleases. The souls of busy people, like oxen harnessed to a yoke, can neither turn around nor look back. That is why their life is like falling into an abyss. No matter how much you pour into a barrel, if there is no bottom in it, it will be of no use. Nothing will remain in it. So it is for them. No matter how much time is given, it will be of no use, for it has nothing to hold on to. It falls through their disheveled, holy souls without holding on. Present time is the briefest moment, so brief that some do not recognize its existence at all. It is always flowing, moving forward at a dizzying speed. It passes before it has time to come, and it is as unstoppable as the world and its luminaries, which know no rest in their circling and never stay in one place. For busy people, then, there is only the present moment, brief as it is elusive. But even this is taken away from them, who are always busy with many things at once. Chapter 4. How short a time they live, do you not believe it? Look for yourself, how eagerly they all long to live long. The decrepit old men try to beg for a few more years at any cost, and go to all sorts of lengths to make themselves look younger. Moreover, they succeed in deceiving themselves, and they are so persistent in suggesting to themselves a pleasant lie, as if they hoped to spend their death at the same time. And when illness or weakness finally reminds them of their mortality, with what fear they die, as if they were not leaving life, but someone forcibly tears them out of it. They weep, lamenting what fools they were not to have lived earlier. They vow, if only they can get out of this illness, to devote the rest of their lives to leisure. And for the first time, the thought occurs to them that all their labors have been in vain, that during their whole life they have only accumulated unnecessary goods, which they will never have time to use. But those whose life is spent away from cares have a truly long life. It is not placed at the disposal of others. It is not thrown to one thing or another. It is not given to fortune. It is not lost through negligence. It is not squandered through immoderate generosity. It is not wasted. All of it, if I may so speak, is placed where it will bring a reliable income. Therefore, no matter how short it may be, it is enough. That is why a wise man always walks without delay towards death with a firm step whenever his last hour arrives. Chapter 12. You may ask, whom do I call busy people? Not only those whom you can only drive out of the basilica by sicking dogs on them, not only those whom you are perpetually seeing in a crush, whether in a place of honor surrounded by your own retinue, or in a less honorable one among strangers. Not only those who are driven out of their own homes by the duties of knocking at other people's doors, or those who are pursued by the praetor's lance for dishonorable secret profiteering, for such matters, sooner or later, always come out like a burst pustule. No, there are people who remain busy even in their leisure, in complete seclusion in their villa or on their bed, removed from people and cares. They continue to be a burden to themselves. Their leisure is more properly called not a carefree life, but a busy idleness. Can one be called carefree who endlessly rearranges the Corinthian vases, which by the efforts of a few madmen are known to be precious, and shudders at the thought that he might make the slightest mistake in their arrangement? Is it leisure to rummage all day long through piles of greenish copper pots? Or sticking around the ring as a fan, keeping an eye on the struggling boys? What a real shame on our heads. Our vices are no longer Roman. Or to distribute his incense-soaked cohorts according to age and suit, or patronize the most fashionable athletes. Can one call it leisure to spend endless hours at the barber's, when everything that has grown overnight is plucked, when long deliberations are held about every hair, when a hair that has fallen apart is restored, or, for want of it, the hair that is still there is carefully combed over the forehead? How terrible is their anger at the slightest carelessness of the barber if he should forget and imagine that he was cutting a man's hair. How quickly they are incandescent with rage if an extra strand of their hair is cut off, if not all the rings fall as they should, if even a hair is out of its proper curl. If you offer any of them a choice between the destruction of their state or their hair, they will not hesitate to choose the former. Is there one among them who would value the health of his own head more than its decoration? Is there one who would prefer honor to attire? Would you call the life of these busy men torn between the comb and the mirror leisure? And then there are those who work tirelessly at composing, listening, learning songs. The voice, which nature has commanded to come out of the throat in the straightest and simplest way to sound best, they twist with the most incredible but equally untalented modulations. Their fingers are always drumming, beating out the rhythm of a mentally repeated melody. And even when they are absorbed in a serious and often sad business, you can hear them purring to themselves some tune. Is there any leisure for such a one? No. It is rather a perpetually busy idleness. But what cannot be called free time is, by Hercules, their feasts. Look how anxious their faces are when they check in what order the silver is placed on the table, how much attention and patience is required to gird up the boys' lovers so that the tunic, God forbid, was not longer than necessary. What a terrible tension, what anguish of uncertainty. How will the cook's wild boar? With what speed the beardless servants fly in at a given sign. With what matchless skill the poultry is cut into pieces so that the portions are not too large. With what care the poor little boys instantly wipe up the vomit of drunken guests. Indeed, all this is arranged only for the sake of making themselves known as refined and generous. They are so slaves to vanity in all their vital activities that they no longer eat or drink except for show. Do not think of those who do not take a step without a porter or stretcher, who keep the hours of their daily walks as if it were a sacrilege to break them, who only know from others when to wash, when to swim, when to dine, whose pampered souls are so weakened and withered that they cannot know for themselves whether they are hungry or not. It is said that one of these sissies, I do not know, however, whether there is much tenderness in weaning oneself from the simplest habits of human life, when he was carried in his arms out of the bath and seated in a chair, asked, "Am I sitting down yet?" But if he does not know whether he is sitting, how can he know whether he is alive, whether he sees anything, and whether he enjoys leisure or is burdened with cares? I even find it difficult to say in which case I sympathize with him more, if he really didn't know or if he pretended not to know. So then, there is already a man who has gone so far in his pampering that he has to rely on the word of another to find out whether he is sitting. Of course, he cannot be called carefree. Another name is more appropriate: sick or even dead. Carefree is the one who realizes his leisure and lack of care. This half-corpse needs a pointer even to understand the position of his body. How can he be the master of even a tiny amount of time? Chapter 13. It would be too long, however, to enumerate one by one all those whose lives are spent in playing pebbles or playing ball or in frying their bodies daily in the sun. No one who is perpetually busy satisfying his desires knows leisure. However, there is a class of people about whom no one usually doubts that they are really not occupied with any business concerns, being entirely absorbed in the study of useless sciences. In recent times, there have been many people of this type in Rome. Originally, this disease appeared in the Greeks. They suddenly rushed to investigate how many rowers were on the ships of Ulysses, what was written earlier, Iliad or Odyssey, and whether they had the same author or different ones, and other things of the same kind, of those things that will give nothing to your soul and mind, if you keep them to yourself, and if you say them out loud, you will be considered not a scientist, but an annoying bore. Now the Romans are seized with a senseless passion to study things that are of no use to anyone. These days I was listening to one report on which of the Roman leaders did what for the first time. I learned that Duilius was the first to win a naval battle, and Curius Dentatus was the first to lead elephants in a triumphal procession. All right, all this, though it has nothing to do with real glory, still revolves around exemplary civic deeds. Such knowledge is of course of no use, but at least it has something appealing to us, essentially empty and shallow, but brilliant and curious. Perhaps there is nothing objectionable in such studies as, for example, who was the first to convince the Romans to board a ship? It was Claudius, which is why he received the nickname Codex, for in the olden days the word codex was used to refer to boards fitted and joined together Whence came the name of the boards on which public decrees were written down? Codices. Besides, ships delivering cargo up the Tiber still retain the ancient name Codicarii. It is not without some interest, of course, that Valerius Corvinus was the first to take Messana and, appropriating the name of the defeated city, was the first in the family of Valerius to be called Messana. In time, because the people confused the letters, this name gradually turned into Messala. But do you think we should devote our energies to finding out that Lucius Sulla was the first to release untethered lions in the circus, which were to be killed by the Bochum shooters sent by the king, and that before that the lions had always been shown only tethered? No, of course, it is quite possible to do that too. But to inquire that it was Pompey who first organized a battle in a circus, in which 22 elephants fought against condemned criminals, who were obliged to fight for real. What good can such an inquiry do? The first among citizens, who had distinguished himself among the great men of antiquity, if rumor is to be believed, by exceptional kindness, invented a new and hitherto unseen method of exterminating men, deciding that it would be a wonderful spectacle. Make them kill each other? Not enough. Tear them to pieces? Not enough. Let's grind them to powder with the feet of giant animals. This should have been forgotten, lest some powerful descendant should learn of such an inhuman deed, and driven by envy should think of outdoing his ancestor. Oh, what impenetrable darkness shrouds our souls with great happiness. In those days, throwing crowds of poor doomed under the feet of foreign monsters, arranging for fun battle between such unequal in strength breeds of living beings, shedding in front of the Roman people streams of blood, to make the people in the near future to shed more of their own blood. In those days, Pompey thought himself elevated above the very nature of things. But as time passed, the same Pompey, deceived by Alexandrian perfidy, put his throat under the knife of the last of his slaves, probably realizing for the first time that his nickname was only an empty boast. 8. But I digress. I wish to show you how empty the most conscientious scientific pursuits can be. Now, the same researcher has discovered that Metellus, in celebrating his triumph after his victory over the Punians in Sicily, was the first and only Roman to lead before his chariot 120 elephants captured from the enemy. That Sulla was the last Roman to carry the pomerium, which in ancient times it was customary to push back only in case of conquest of the Italic field and not of provincial lands. But even this, however, it is perhaps not inconvenient to know. At any rate, it is more useful than the same author's considerations as to why the Aventine was left outside the city limits. He gives two possible reasons. First, that to this hill the plebs withdrew. Secondly, that at the auspices of Remus, the birds were not told to choose this place. All the rest of his writing is of the same kind. Innumerable fables, containing either pure lies or something very close to them. 9. However, even if we assume that we can believe every word of such authors and that everything they write is true, what of it? Who will they guide to the true path? Who will be delivered from the power of passions? Who will be made more courageous, more just, more generous? Our Fabian often said that it would probably be better to give up science altogether than to engage in such nonsense. Chapter 14. Only those of men who have time for wisdom have leisure. They alone live. It is not only their own years that they keep unspent. To the time allotted to them they add the rest, making all the years that have elapsed before them their possession. If we have not yet completely lost the ability to accept favors, it is for us that the illustrious creators of the sacred teachings were born. It is for us that they prepared us for life. We are being led to dazzling treasures that have been dug up by a foreign hand and brought out of darkness into the light. There is not a century where we are forbidden to enter. Everywhere the way is free for us. And if we want to break with the power of our spirit the close confines of human weakness, we will have at our disposal a vast expanse of time for walking. We can argue with Socrates, doubt with Carneades, enjoy peace with Epicurus, conquer human nature with the Stoics, or transcend it with the Cynics. Since the nature of things allows us to enter into communion with any age, why should we not turn with our whole soul from this insignificant, fleeting, transient fragment of time called the present to the immeasurable eternity, where we are together with the best of men? Let us suppose that they give full vent to their madness and go daily to the doorsteps of every Roman house without missing a single unlocked door, spreading their paid morning greeting to all parts of the city. Do you think they will see much of this monstrously crowded city, torn by all kinds of lusts? How many doors will the drowsiness, the arrogant luxury, or the impoliteness of their hosts drive them from? How many times, after torturing them for hours in the anteroom, will they not even be invited to sit down on the plea of urgent business? In how many houses the owner, not daring to go out into the atrium full of customers, slips quietly out the back door, as if to deceive, more courteous than not let on the doorstep? And how many will meet these unfortunate, eternally sleep-deprived, just to be in time for the awakening of others, people half asleep with a heavy head from yesterday's hangover, who will respond to the name, 100 times called to them respectful whisper, only the most insolent yawn? I think, if you allow me to say what I think, that the real business is occupied only by those who daily strive to become as much as possible their own man at Zeno, Pythagoras, Democritus, and other outstanding masters of truly good arts, who want to become close to Aristotle and Theophrastus. None of them will not point you to the door for lack of time. Anyone who comes to them will leave happy, inflamed with even greater love for them. No guest will not leave them empty-handed. At any time of day or night, their doors are open to any mortal. Chapter 15. None of them will force you to die, but each will teach you how to die. Not one of them will steal your years from you, but each will willingly add to you his own. Among them there is not one with whom frank conversation would be dangerous. Friendship could cost a head, who would demand ruinous signs of attention. You'll get all you want out of them. If you draw from them less than you could absorb, it will not be their fault. What happiness, what a wonderful old age awaits him who places himself under their patronage. He will have someone to talk to about small things and the most important things. He will have someone to consult with every day about his affairs. He will have someone to hear the truth without reproach and praise without flattery. He will have someone to emulate. We often say that it is not in our power to choose our parents, that the lot of our birth is random. In fact, we are free to decide at our own discretion where to be born. There are families of the noblest minds and gifts. Choose which family you wish to be a member of. Through adoption, you will not only acquire a name, you will become heir to the entire family fortune, which is a wealth that you do not have to guard by becoming a cruel miser. It becomes more abundant the more people among whom it is shared. Your new relatives will show you the way to eternity and help you climb to the summit from which no one falls anywhere. This is the only way to prolong our mortal age, moreover, to turn it into immortality. The honors, the monuments, the governmental decrees which ambition has achieved, the buildings it has erected, all these are rapidly crumbling. Nothing can resist old age, which shakes everything and turns it into ruins. But that which is sanctified by wisdom is invulnerable to old age. No matter how many centuries pass, it does not diminish. Does not diminish. On the contrary, with every century its glory grows. For the close is always an object of envy, and the distant is easier to admire. So the life of a wise man lasts a long time. He is not confined within the same earthly term as other mortals. He is not bound by the laws of the human race. All ages serve him as a god. Some time passes. He keeps it in his recollection. Some time comes. He utilizes it. Some time is to come. He anticipates it beforehand. And it is this joining of all times into one that makes his life long. Chapter 15. The shortest and most troubled lives are those of people who do not remember the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. When the end comes, The unhappy ones realize too late that they have been busy all their lives, but have done exactly nothing. Please do not think that if they sometimes call for death themselves, it proves that they have lived a long life. Nothing of the kind. It is simply because they are unwise. They often do not know what they want and strive for what they fear. So often they call for death because they fear it more than anything else in the world. Do not think that it is a sign of longevity that many of them often find the day too long and complain that they cannot wait for the dinner hour. The fact is that as soon as they stop being eternally busy and find themselves at rest, they cannot find a place, not knowing how to dispose of their leisure time, how to endure it. And so they begin to look for some occupation, and every break between them is a burden to them, so that they, by Hercules, would dream of simply jumping over a few days if, for example, the day of the gladiatorial games is announced, or the date of another long-awaited spectacle or pleasure is set. The time that separates them from the fulfillment of their desires seems to them inordinately long, but the time that is sweet to them flies by with dizzying speed, shortened also by their own fault. Unable to remain faithful to their own passion, they are always jumping from one lust to another. The day for them is not so much long as it is hateful, but how short the nights spent in the arms of a whore or over wine seem to them. This is where the blasphemous and insane fiction of the poets came from, as if Jupiter, finally languishing from the pleasures of love, lengthened the night twice, the food of poetic myths, human delusions. Apparently, the only purpose they pursue is to fan the fire of our vices, for what else can it lead to? To the gods is attributed the invention of all our abominations, and any human depravity, when consecrated by divine authority, is excused and justified. And to men, how can the nights, bought at so dear a price, not seem too short? The expectation of night kills their day, the fear of dawn ruins their night. Chapter 17. Even their pleasures are filled with anxiety and various fears. The moment of supreme delight is poisoned by the anxious thought, how long will it last? This was the feeling that made the kings mourn for their power. They were no longer happy with the happiness granted by fate, but dreaded the coming end. One Persian king of exorbitant pride, C6, ordered to build his army in the steppe, but unable to count the soldiers, measured only its length and cried that, say, not even 100 years will pass, as out of 1,000 of these selected young men will not remain a single one. But he himself, in tears, led them to meet their doom. He himself, so anxious about what would happen to them in 100 years, destroyed them all within a few months, some at sea, some on land, some in battle, some in flight. Yea, are not all their joys mingled with fear and anxiety? For they are not produced by base causes, but by trifling vanity, which then poisons them. But if even in those moments when the rapture, they say, raises them to unearthly heights, they cannot experience pure joy without an admixture of fear, think what must be the times which they themselves call miserable? The greater the good, the greater the anxiety connected with it, the fuller the happiness, the less you can rely on it. To hold on to what you have gotten, you need another fortune. If what you sacrificed for has been fulfilled, you must sooner sacrifice for that fulfillment, and so on without end. All that is gained by luck is fragile. The higher one rises, the easier it is to fall. But who will be pleased with that which at any moment may fall? This means that not only the shortest, but also the most miserable life is lived by people who, with great labor, obtain goods for themselves, the possession of which will require from them even greater labor. Every effort is made to achieve what is desired, and then how much anxiety to hold on to what has been achieved. Meanwhile, the time that is irretrievably passing is not taken into account. Old things are not yet finished, but new things have already appeared. One ambitious plan gives rise to others. Hope leads to hope. But we do not try to put an end to our misfortunes. We only fill them with new content. We have spent a lot of time seeking honorable positions for ourselves. Now we spend even more time seeking them for others. No sooner do we get rid of the drudgery of being a candidate than we start collecting votes for someone else. No sooner do we breathe a sigh of relief, having resigned the duties of the prosecutor, than the judicial powers are already here. And whoever ceases to be a judge is already appointed an investigator or a court president. When a man has grown old, managing other people's estates for a salary, he is now concerned about his own wealth, accumulated over the years, and he has no rest. Marius has not had time to take off his soldier's boots, and already the consulate is demanding all his energies and attention. Quinctius is in a hurry to resign his dictatorship. He is already called to return to the plow. But Scipio, a youth not yet grown up to such matters, he will go after the Punians. Victor of Hannibal, victor of Antiochus, the ornament of his own consulship, the surety of the brotherhood, he would have been elevated to the throne next to Jupiter, had he not himself moderated the popular enthusiasms. But civil strife will not give rest to the Savior, and instead of honors not inferior to those of the divine, and scornfully rejected by the youth, the old man will have but one joy, to be proud of his obstinate exile. There will never be any lack of cause for anxiety, whether it be fear of present happiness or of impending misfortune. One care will push life onto another. The ever-desired leisure will never come. Chapter 15. So at last, dear Paulinus, get out of the human whirlpool and return to a quiet harbor. You have been on the waves longer than your age would warrant. Remember how many times you have been caught at sea by bad weather, how many domestic thunderstorms you have had to endure, how many public storms you have caused yourself. Believe me, in your many labors, cares, and anxieties, you have quite proved your virtue. It is time to see what it is worth at leisure. Let the greater and better part of your life be given to the state, but at least take some of the time that belongs to you. I do not urge you to lazy and inactive rest, nor do I want you to sink into slumber or drown your living gifts in pleasures that please the crowd. That is not what I call rest. No, there are great things in store for you, greater than any that you have hitherto undertaken with your usual vigor and zeal, and you will undertake them far from the anxieties and vanities of men. You examine the money accounts of the whole globe as disinterestedly as if they were other people's, as carefully as if they were your own, as if they were a sacred duty, as if they were public. You have earned your love by holding a position in which it is rare for anyone to escape hatred. And yet, believe me, it is better to take stock of your own life than of the harvest of the state's bread. Your spirit is full of life and vigor. It is still capable of the greatest achievements, so release it from service. It is honorable, there is no doubt, but it is little suitable for a blissful life. Think, did you devote all your zeal from a young age to the study of free sciences, so that now you can take care of the safety of many thousands of poods of wheat? No, you are expected to do more and more. There will be no shortage of stewards and hard workers without you. Slow, heavy horses are much more suitable for transportation than blooded stallions. Who would load a thoroughbred horse? And consider this, how much worry and anxiety is added to the heavy burden you have already placed upon yourself, for you have to deal directly with the stomach of man, and a hungry people does not listen to arguments, does not justify the innocent, is not softened by pleas for mercy. Quite recently, in the days when Gaius Caesar died, the public treasuries were so empty that there was bread left for some 7 or 8 days. If the dead can feel anything, as he must have agonized, poor man, that the Roman people had outlived him. While he was building bridges from cargo ships, turning the might of the empire into toys, a calamity most terrible even for those besieged by the enemy, the lack of food, came close at hand. Imitating the mad foreign king, who was ruined by pride, almost cost us starvation and death. for starvation would inevitably have been followed by the collapse of everything and everyone. How must the men who were entrusted with the care of the state's bread supply have felt in those days? After all, they were threatened by stones, swords, fire, and Gaius himself. Calling to their aid all their pretense, they concealed the monstrous disease that had already struck the innards of the state. And there was a reason for this. Some diseases should be treated without telling the patient about them. Many died because they found out what they were sick of. Rather give it up and go to the business of the quiet, the safe, the great. Do you not care whether you continue to take care that the grain is delivered to the storehouses without loss, not plundered by crooks, not wasted by lazy men, that it does not get wet, not spoiled, not soggy, that its weight and volume accurately agree, or whether you proceed to the study of sacred higher subjects and find out what is the matter of God, His will, His state, His form? What fate awaits your soul? Where nature will take us when she frees us from the body? What power holds the heaviest parts of this world in the middle, suspends the lighter ones above them, and above all raises fire and makes the luminaries move each in its own way, and many other things filled with unimaginable wonders? Do you not wish to leave the earth and fix your spiritual gaze there upward? It is now, before your blood runs cold, before your strength runs out, that you must go in search of the best. I offer you a kind of life where many noble arts, love of virtue and its practical application, oblivion of lusts, knowledge of life and death, and deep peace await you. Chapter 5. The fate of all busy people is worthy of pity, but the most miserable fate is reserved for those who are busy with things not even their own, who fall asleep adjusting themselves to another's sleep, who walk adjusting themselves to another's step, who even love and hate at the behest of others, though in this it would seem all are free. If they wish to know how short their life is, they would only have to estimate how much of it belongs to them. So don't be envious when you see a prettiness worn not for the first time, when you hear a name famous in the forum. These things are obtained at the cost of one's own life. People are willing to kill all their years to have one called by their name. Some do not manage to reach the summits to which their ambition calls them. Life leaves them when they have just begun to fight their way up in a fierce struggle. Some, having waded through thousands of dishonorable meannesses, still break through to the heights of honor and glory, only to be struck by the sorrowful thought that all the hardships they endured were only for the sake of a tombstone inscription. Others, on the slope of years, color their future with radiant hopes, confusing old age with youth, and decrepit forces betray them in the midst of new, shamelessly grandiose enterprises. The old man who breathes his breath in the middle of a court session, hearing the litigation of petty squabblers, eagerly catching the approval of the ignorant spectators. Shame on him who dies in the line of duty, tired of life before his work. Shame on him who goes to the other world, sitting at his account books, to the ridicule of his expectant heir. I cannot help giving another example which has just occurred to me. Gaius Tyrannius was an old man of rare neatness, but when he was over 90, Gaius Caesar relieved him of his procuratorial office without a request on his part. Then, Tyrannius ordered himself to be laid on his deathbed and mourned by the whole house as a dead man. And all the household, gathered around, wept that their aged master had at last had a chance to rest, and the mourning did not end until the old man was reinstated. Is it really so pleasant to die busy? But that's the way it is with most people. They want to work longer than they can. They fight hard against bodily weakness, and old age itself is a burden to them because it prevents them from working. The law does not call into the army after 50. It does not appoint to the Senate after 60. It is easier for men to obtain leisure for themselves from the law than from themselves. But while they grab what they can and become other people's prey themselves, while they give each other no rest, while they make each other miserable, while life passes, barren, joyless, useless to the soul. No one thinks about death. Everyone goes far ahead in his hopes, and some try to run in their plans on the other side of life, worrying about huge tombstones, about the dedication of public buildings, about the gifts that will be placed in the funeral pyre, and about a magnificent funeral procession to the envy of all. And yet they lived, by Hercules, so insignificantly little that they should have been buried by candlelight and torches.